Has God been good? He's been good this week. He's been good the last year, has he not? We're going to talk about that this morning. We're going to go into a business meeting right following our service, but the business meeting starts now, doesn't it? We want to talk about how great God has been. Thank you for singing that song, Brother David. That was good. How can you go wrong with that song, right? That's just a great, great song. I love that. Well, today I'm going to tell you the passage, and then I will catch up to you in a minute. That way you get an opportunity to find it. It's in Nehemiah, and you're thinking, okay, let me help you out. You know, in the Old Testament, all the first and seconds. After that comes Ezra and then Nehemiah. Okay, if you want to go backwards, just flip to the middle of your Bible. You'll be about in Psalms. Back up a little bit. You're going to see Job and Esther and then Nehemiah. So it's right in that area, okay? Nehemiah chapter 1. And I want you to stick close to our passage today because I'm going to jump around a little bit, but I'm going to stay in the first 4 chapters of Nehemiah, okay? So if you hold right there, you'll be able to catch where we're going to be. It'll be on the screen for you as well. But last year was a crazy year, wasn't it? And when I say crazy, most of you in your minds just now thought about COVID, didn't you? We're not going to talk about COVID today because that's not the crazy I'm talking about. Sometimes crazy is good, right? And last year was crazy good at times. It was crazy good for the life of our church. Do you remember? Our fiscal year rolls over 1st of September, okay? That's why we're going into a budgeting meeting this afternoon, because it's time for our budget, right? So our fiscal year rolls over 1st of September. Do you know where we were last September? We were barely back in the building by 2 weeks. We had been in this building since the 14th or 15th, I think it was, of August, was our first day back inside the building. So last year was crazy, but it was crazy good, wasn't it? We got back in our building 2 weeks before our new fiscal year. We took back all sorts of stuff, didn't we, over the next 12 months. This is how crazy good last year was. We took back communion in May. We took back midweek. We took back Christmas in June. You remember that? Darren Henry, that was the best time of his life. He got to decorate for the first time twice in 1 year. So that was a good day for him. We took back camp. We took back fellowship dinners. We took back our van service. We took back VBS. We took back our choir. We took back choir specials. And then someone jokingly said on August 8th, we took back our pastor because I too came sick with COVID. So we took back a lot over this last year. So yes, it was a crazy year if we just relate it to COVID, but it was a crazy good year when we see what we have gained back, isn't it? Over the last year, we saw COVID come and go and come again, right? I'm waiting for the go part where it goes away. Right? Where we talk about that with our children and grandchildren. Oh yeah, way back, there was this thing called COVID. You know, that's kind of how we talk about Ebola, bird flu, swine flu, whatever other flu, cat flu. I don't know, there's got to be a cat flu, right? There's no dog flu, but I'm sure there's a cat flu. You know, anything bad, right? Don't shake your head at me, Tofga. I'm watching you. We saw missionaries return to the pulpit, to the field, right? You remember Doug and Diane Lee came, shared the ministry there in the Philippines with us, and we as a church got to participate. We're putting a roof on a church in the Philippines right now, and then the other church, we're going to put a roof on it too. But we're also going to lay the foundation, and we're going to build the walls and everything else that goes with it. That's what you got to do. That was a crazy good year. Spoiler alert, October 31st, we'll have another missionary to the Philippines here. Brother Phil Kakilala will be with us on October 31st. And we'll get to hear the work that's going on there that he is involved in. I'm looking forward to that. In the last year, we saw David Downey licensed to preach the gospel. About 8 months later, we saw him ordained to the ministry of the gospel. You recognize the external call on his life to back up the internal call that he has already expressed to us. And we saw that this fiscal year. In the last 12 months, it's been a crazy good year. Do you know how many churches close on a monthly basis? It's scary. You know how many ministers just leave the ministry, not leave their work and go to another work, but just quit. They're just, I'm done. It's not like they're retiring. It's just they're fed up. We need more men like David to step up and to be called and to be licensed and to be ordained. We saw our first Genesis weekend over this last fiscal year. That's for our youth. Now, some of you are looking at me like, I don't know what that is. Talk to Brother David. He'll explain it all to you. All what it's about. We saw our first wildfire weekend. Several salvations, baptisms coming out of that. There's a couple we're still waiting to baptize coming out of that weekend. And Brother David in our staff meetings has already told me, I'm already planning the next Genesis weekend, the next wildfire weekend. And oh, by the way, he has started a program where our youth are going through the entire Bible over the next 3 years, teaching all the way through the Bible in 3 years. That's bold. That takes commitment. It's been a crazy good year. We hosted Jacksonville College. And I say Jacksonville College because normally we host the choir, right? We hosted the college. We had the choir, we had Dr. Smith, we had Dr. Leitner, right? We had them all. We didn't know at the time that Dr. Leitner would be the new Dr. Smith, as Dr. Smith was retiring. But that took place, a month or so, I guess, after they visited with us. But wasn't that great to be able to host again like that? We haven't been able to do that in at least 18 months. We hosted Texas Baptist Home for Children. All of this happened over the last 12 months. So yes, I understand that paradigm that we've been stuck with over this past 18 months plus. We're coming up on 2 years. And, we're coming up on me for 2 years. The end of this month, I'll be here 2 years. But right after I got here, COVID came. I hope that's not related, okay? Because that's not a good thing to sync up, okay? But we're coming up on 2 years of COVID. So I understand when I say it's been a crazy year that we just automatically go to COVID. But I want you to see what God has done in the life of this local body of believers, and that's the crazy good that I'm talking about. All of this has taken place over the last 12 months. And during those 12 months, we even made a little bit of progress in the book of John, right? We've been in the book of John for how long? Almost 2 years. When I came in view of a call. Do you remember the message? Do you remember the passage? John 1:1. That was the beginning. That evening, it was the passage that followed, and it's been the passage that follows ever since. We made 6 chapters. Maybe we're going to lay out a vision for you for the next year. Maybe we'll get through John in the next year. I'm not going to say yes because that's a commitment. There's another 7 chapters and plus 2 more messages out of chapter 13 before we get through it. So I don't know. Maybe we'll get through it. I think we will. It's going to be close. It's been a good year for giving as well. It's been a crazy year for giving. There's churches all across our nation that have closed because when the building shut down, the people stopped giving. And I don't find that in Scripture. I don't find that, hey, if there's a pandemic, you can just stop giving. You know, a lot of people stopped paying their rent. A lot of people stopped going to work. They were making more money sitting at home. I don't think any of that is scriptural. I think the Bible teaches that we ought to pay our debts. I think the Bible teaches that if you're going to eat, you work. That's Scripture. That's not just some preacher saying his opinion. That's Scripture. So you can argue with me, but you can't argue with Scripture, right? When it comes to that. A lot of people have stopped doing a lot of things, but you, church, did not stop giving when we were outside of this building. Some of you, each week for about 10 weeks in a row, you put your tithe and your offerings in a 5-gallon bucket. Do you remember that? That's how crazy this has all been. We met outside in the parking lot for 10 weeks, and as you went out, there was a couple of people there with 2 5-gallon buckets, and that was the offering plate. What kind of church have we become where we take up the offering in a 5-gallon Home Depot bucket? Right? I don't think it was Home Depot, was it, Victor? There were trash cans. Okay, it was worse. Can you imagine, these offering plates we send around, they're only like this deep. Can you imagine giving so much that you got to use a trash can? That's a good problem, right? I like that. Most of you, many of you have gone to online giving, and I want to thank you for that on behalf of the church and on behalf of Brother Bob that has to deal with all of that. That online giving makes it so much easier on him. He does a lot of work every week. And during this pandemic, he has done triple the amount because he's the only one doing it. Remember, we used to have other people count that money for him, and he'd have to deal with that part. Now he has to deal with all of it right now because of COVID. We're ready to put that financial committee back together so that they can start taking some of the load and that we can create margin in Brother Bob's time as well. This giving app that we're going to, it helps. And I get that report. Brother Bob goes, every Sunday afternoon, he sends me a report of all the breakdown of everything that happened today. And I love that. And I know it takes a sacrifice of his time outside of this service right here. So when you go home, he's still working. But most of us, we don't see that. So going to this online giving app, it helps. And it helps the church. If you have it come out of your bank account as opposed to a debit or credit card, it costs 25 cents. That's it. Our old giving app was exponentially more. It was a percentage. If it comes out of a debit card or a credit card, it is a percentage, but it's even lower than our old giving app. And that's why we're going away from our old giving app and going to this one. And most of you cover the 25 cents. It gives you a little option there. Do you want to cover the quarter it costs to make this transaction? Yep, click that, and it's good to go. I love that, and I love that many of you have gone to that. Now, over the last year, you want to know what our budget was? Our 2020 to 2021 fiscal year general fund budget was $326,000. That's bold for a church our size. Do you want to know what you gave? $430,000. That's how crazy good last year was. Some of you are doing the math. I'll help the rest of you that are still working on it, or you're trying to find the app on your phone. That's $104,000 over the budget in the general fund. Just the general fund. That didn't include the designated. You want to know what you gave to the designated funds? all encompassing, all of the designated funds, just over $50,000. In addition to the 430. Now, some of you, that's easier math. That's $480,000. A church our size just gave almost $500,000 to the ministry of the gospel. That's crazy good. That's amazing. Breakdown of those $50,000 in designated funds, you gave just over the last 12 months $6,500 to the Galen Henry Missions Fund. You understand, we have two missions things on our envelopes on the back of the chairs. One just says missions. If you give and you mark that, we send that directly to the BMA Missions Department, and they use that wherever the need is. Wherever that need arises, they use that money for that. The Galen Henry Fund is right underneath that, and that one, we do projects for missionaries. They might be stateside, they might be overseas, and we seek them out and we do projects. That's what we gave last year when we went to the Philippines and we built a church, or we're building a church, and we're putting a roof on another one. That came straight out of the Galen Henry Missions Fund. You gave $6,500 to that fund over the last 12 months. And that fund has not been in existence for 12 months. And you still gave $6,500. You gave an additional $9,200 to the technology fund. You know that we have been upgrading our technology all across this building. From our alarm system to our cameras to our equipment in the offices to our equipment on the stage. You're starting to see different pieces and parts. You might see in the stage right in front of me the Phil speakers, F-I-L-L speakers. That's to help you first two rows. Because when I step off the platform, I can no longer hear me. Why? Because I'm in front of the monitors and I'm behind the house speakers. That is one of the best speakers made today. It is amazing. We're not going to get rid of it. You know why? Because it's amazing. I already said that. Okay, if you were paying attention, you wouldn't ask that question. It's amazing, and it fills this room perfectly, but the first two rows don't get everything. When we plug this in, and they're already wired to each other, and they're wired back here to our new stage box, most of you have never seen it. When we're done, we're going to give you a tour. Because I don't even understand it. There's so many pieces and parts to this thing back here. It's already wired back there. When we get to plug it in, the first two rows are going to be like, wow, I get to experience church like the rest of those guys do on rows three and beyond. You know, they're going to hear what you hear. The heathens, yes. Those that sit third row back. The back row is full all the time, right? That's every Baptist church. Brother Timothy, you got to stop showing that view of the camera view of these first few rows because there's nobody in it. Stop that, okay? They think there's nobody here. They're all in the back. They're Baptist. It's on the sign, okay? South Park Baptist, we sit on the back rows, church, right? We need to put that in parentheses out there, right? You gave an additional $9,200 to that. And because of what you have given, you've given a total in that tech fund of $25,000 since we started it. That, with the addition of some other funds, we've been able to do what we've planned to do. The only thing it looks like we're going to lack that was on that list is our external cameras. We're going to upgrade all of those to commercial grade cameras. That's the only thing that we plan to do that we're not going to be able to do, and I'm going to talk to you about that in just a moment. That left $34,000 that you designated to other funds. For instance, Jacksonville College, Texas Baptist Home for Children, LifeWord, Benevolence, the Van Fund, the Youth Ministry, the Ladies Ministry, and much more. $50,000 in designated funds, $430,000 in the general fund. You gave over $480,000 last year. That's crazy. That's crazy good. My prayer is that this year be just as crazy. I'm up for another crazy year. Are you? Maybe not so much COVID crazy, but listen, COVID made us grow. COVID made us rethink how we do ministry. We have an online ministry right now that we hadn't even dreamed about a year and a half ago. We had an online ministry then, but we have expanded that so much. It is incredible what we can do today that COVID forced us to do. It's opened avenues of ministry for us. I don't like COVID, and I would have rather done this without it, but God has still been good through all of this. I'm reminded in Scripture of another crazy time in the nation of Israel. Here in Nehemiah, the nation had been disobedient to God. God punished them. They were dispersed. They were slowly starting to come back. Slowly starting to come back. And Nehemiah identifies a need. He identifies a problem. Look at this in Nehemiah. Now we're going to skip around, so just hang on, okay? Just stick right there. We're going to be in chapter 1. We're going to start there in verse 2. Nehemiah says, look at the phrase where he says, and I asked. He says, and I asked them concerning the Jews who escaped, who had survived the exile, and concerning Jerusalem. Verse 3. And they said to me, the remnant there in the province who had survived the exile is in great trouble and shame. He's identifying a need here, right? The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are destroyed by fire. He says, there's the need. First thing he does when he identifies the need is he prays about it. Look at verse 4. As soon as I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days, and I continued fasting and praying before the God of heaven. Fasting, listen, praying is one thing. Fasting and praying is totally different, right? We don't fast and pray to call attention to ourselves, do we? We don't do that. We fast privately so that for a spiritual reason. And Nehemiah says, I'm fasting and praying before the God of heaven. He's concerned about this need. He identifies a need and he says, we need to meet this need. Listen, that's what we're going to do as a church this year. We're going to identify a need and we're going to pray about it, and then we're going to ask to be a part of it. We're going to ask to make a difference when it comes to that need. So he's fasting and praying here. Now look at chapter 2 and verse 2. It says, and the king said to me, you see, he was so bothered by the need. He was so wrecked that there was a need that needed to be met that he was visibly bothered. Now remember, in Nehemiah's position, that's not allowed. You're not allowed to have a bad attitude in front of the king. You're not allowed to be sad in front of the king. You could be killed for that, right? Watch what the king says in chapter 2 and verse 2. And the king said to me, why is your face sad, seeing you're not sick? He says, you shouldn't be sad. You're not sick. This is nothing but sadness of the heart. Then I was very much afraid. He was afraid for himself, right? I said to the king, let the king live forever. Translation, let me live forever, okay? Because I messed up. I'm in front of the king and I want the king to, I'm going to just smooze the king here for a minute, right? Let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my fathers, graves lie in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? He explains to the king what's going on. And then he talks about his plan. Look at the next verse, verse 4, chapter 2 and verse 4. Then the king said to me, what are you asking? What are you requesting? So I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, that you, what's the next two words? Send me. Send me to Judah, to the city of my fathers' graves, that I may rebuild it. He says, send me. He says, let me be part of the solution. I've identified a need. I've prayed to the God of heaven. I've fasted. I am so wrecked by this that I am requesting that you, King, would send me. Let me be involved. Let me be the one to make a difference. Listen, I think that's something that our church should be able to say as we move from this fiscal year to the next is, send me. If every single person in this church, in every local body of believers across the nation, around the world, said, God, there are needs in other places. There are needs in the place where I work. There are needs in my own family. Lord, send me. There's a whole list on our prayer list that we send out every week. Most of those are family members. Some of them are friends and acquaintances, but most of those are family members that don't know Jesus Christ. I wonder if you this week, this year, would say, Lord, send me to that person. Because we look at that list and most times we say, Lord, send someone, right? We say, send someone else because they won't listen to me. Maybe they will. If you just prayed and you just asked God to say, Lord, I want to be the one to make a difference in their life. I want to be part of the solution. I want to be the one to spread the gospel. Send me, not the preacher, not one of the deacons, not somebody else. Lord, send me. When a need arises in our church, financially or elsewise, what if we all prayed that? Lord, is it me that you're asking to meet that need? We're going to lay out a budget for you in just a moment, and you're going to get that opportunity because we're going to stretch you. You were faithful last year, and that's the kind of margin I've been talking about. That's more than the margin I've been talking about that we need in our budget, in our time, in all of that it entails. And we're going to stretch our budget this year because we don't want to be stagnant. We don't want to just do today, this coming year what we did last year. We want to top that. We want to go above and beyond. We want what we do in the next year to have eternal results for someone. It has to. And we're going to ask you to approve a budget that not only deals with our physical plant here on Crowley Road, but it deals with an eternal investment in lives that will result in an eternity for how many people in heaven one day? We have no clue, right? Some of this will be a challenge. Looking at the finances from last year and looking at what we're going to ask you to do this year, some of it's going to be a challenge. Don't you know that Nehemiah had a challenge? Could Nehemiah go back and rebuild the wall and rebuild the gates and all of that all by himself? Nope. That was impossible, right? And that was a challenge. And there was opposition, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But there was a huge challenge. And I think they met the challenge. When you read those first 4 chapters, you'll see they met the challenge. And I think our church can come together and meet the challenge as well. Listen to this. This is what we're going to ask you to do over the next year. 1, we're going to get back on our sign, and we're going to try to get that sign up in the next year. COVID stole that from us. It shut down that department in the city, and we couldn't deal with those people. Our tech fund, we're almost there. You might not even notice there's 5 new holes in the floor up here. You can't even see them, can you? There's these little boxes, and if you open them up, oh man, if you're a man, it's beautiful. Because we like buttons and gadgets and all that. And I'm telling you what, you open one of these up, there's 14 places I can plug something up in there. 14 places, and some of them are outlets, some of them are Cat 5, some of them are structured wiring of one set or another, some of them are Catcon, some of them are XLR, some of them are 1/4 inch. Listen, if you got it, we can plug it in. And we're this close to hiring the crew that's going to come out and make those 1,000 solder joints that are going to be required under this stage to get back there to our stage box. Once that is accomplished, that booth will move to there. That is the missing link. And we are this close to getting it done. So we're going to get that done. We're going to get the sign up. If we can get that through the city, we want that up this year. We've already raised the money for it. As long as that doesn't change, we know that we're going to have to completely replace the sign that's there. We have dug and dug and dug, tried to find the paperwork on the foundation of this sign, and they're going to require an engineered drawing for our foundation, or we can't do it. So it's going to take a new foundation. We're going to have to do all of that. But we think we can still do it for the money that has already been raised. So we're going to try to get that done this year. We're going to take out 2 breakout rooms upstairs for our youth. We're going to make those environments. Right now, it's just 4 walls with some paint. And we're going to try to make that an environment for them. We're going to ask you to do that. Our tech fund, we're almost there. We're almost to zero it out. We're going to zero that fund out this year. That is going to be accomplished. We will come back to you when it comes to the external cameras on that and how we want to handle that. But other than that, the purpose for starting our technology fund will have been accomplished. Everything that we put on that list will have been done, and we're going to zero that out in the next year. We're also going to have asked you to approve $2,000 extra in the budget for some chairs and equipment and fans that we need to upgrade in the offices. We're going to ask you for that. We're going to ask you to contribute the first $3,000 towards converting our facilities to LED. We're going to get rid of our fluorescent lights, and we're going to go to LED. That's going to save us significantly on our electric bill, which runs us $1,500, $1,600 a month. If your power bill ran that, you would have already converted. We're going to do that, okay? That will be a drop in the bucket. That $3,000, that's going to pay us back rather quickly. And we're going to ask you to approve that in the budget. We're going to come back to you later in the year when we're ready for our external cameras, and we're going to ask you to put commercial cameras on this building that are more than just watching people steal our stuff, but it's actionable stuff that we can send to the police department. When our barn was broken into, our cameras were sufficient to watch them if you were sitting there watching at the time. The camera is too far away to see the motion, and it did not record it. And the cameras that recorded it did not give the police department anything actionable. We're going to ask you to change that. Whether we raise those funds or pull them from the general fund, that will be a business-related item at a later date. We're also going to ask you to contribute. We're going to take some of this out of the building fund, but we want to try to raise some of the money. We have to replace the carpet in both of our sanctuaries. Some of that may not go back as carpet. We don't know yet. We haven't gotten to that point, but we know the flooring needs to be replaced in both of our worship centers and the main hallway from the glass doors all the way to the gym. All of that needs to be replaced. Every time we have a funeral, we have to carry the casket all the way to the front. That means the pallbearers have to be here an hour and a half early. We have to make special arrangements every single time. The way our carpet is laid right now, we need this flooring because it's coming up. If you just look at the aisle right now, you'll see the ripples. You see that? That's because there's padding underneath this carpet. That padding is glued to the concrete. This carpet is glued to the padding. The constant rolling back and forth, it rolls up that carpet, it breaks that bond, and that is never going to get better. This carpet is old. It's served its purpose. We got our money's worth and then some out of it. We're going to ask you to approve a budget to do that. And we're going to ask you to contribute, towards that. We're also going to ask you to contribute. Some of you have been doing this already. You see the need for a new bus. We're going to add an additional bus, about a 25-passenger bus that is handicap accessible. We have some people in our church that are getting to the point where they're not going to be able to drive as easily, and we want to have the vehicle that we can pick them up, as well as to do events, class events, VIPs, whatever, different events. We need a larger bus. Every time we go to camp, we have to rent another vehicle, or we have to take personally owned vehicles, and we need this bus. This bus will cost about $75,000. In addition to that, we need at least $25,000 for a new barn, because we're not going to spend $75,000 on a bus and park it outside. That's not happening. So we need a barn and a bus. We're talking a $100,000 project. We're going to ask you to begin that, to begin contributing towards that as a designated fund. We already have that fund set up, and we have half of the 100 already in there. If the price of steel was not where it is right now, we would already today be looking to build the barn. We want to build the barn and then bring the bus, right? So when the price of steel comes back and it normalizes, we're going to build the barn. That's over the next year. That's bold, right? I'm also going to ask you to approve in the budget $500 a month or $6,000 a year to be contributed out of the general fund. Because of your faithfulness over the last year, we're going to ask that we contribute out of the general fund $500 a month towards this very fund. We know that need is coming due, and if we don't get passionate about it and we don't start contributing for it, that need's going to be here, and we're not going to be able to meet that need as quickly as we need to. That will be an additional $6,000 into that fund every year. We want to do more than that. That's pretty bold for 1 year, isn't it? That's a lot. Did you notice something about all of those items? Every single one of them had something to do with what I like to call the trellis. I've got a book in my office called The Trellis and the Vine. Some churches, they spend so much time working on the trellis that they never get to the vine. You know, what's the most important part? The vine, right? If we, the people in the church, are the vine, right? If our facilities for some reason were gone tomorrow, the church would not be closed, right? Because the church is you. It's not the building. So if we spend all of our time, all of our effort on the building, then we're missing something, right? We're just working on the trellis. Well, that's great if we've got a beautiful trellis, but there's no vine growing on it. There's no ministry happening. There's no lives being changed. There's no souls being saved. Then we're just building our kingdom, right? Everything I just mentioned has something to do with the trellis. That leads me to what we're going to ask you to do for the vine. Listen, we need to be able to go further, faster, as Andy Stanley says. He uses that term in a lot of different ways. We need to be able to go further, faster. We're going to ask you in the budget to approve bringing Melissa Michael on for an extra day per week. That's a $5,000 increase annually. Right now, she is in the office for 2 days a week. And I believe, as the deacons do, that we may be bleeding into a third day or more. And we're going to ask you to bring her in for a third day. That way we can get 24 hours of support. And if we're going to go where we're going to go in the next year, we're going to need that and then some, right? So I'm going to ask you to prove that. That's in the budget. Brother Bob will be talking about that in just a little while. I'm also going to ask you to bring David Downey on as a full-time minister. That's bold. You knew when I got here, that was my goal. We need that as a full-time position. Listen, I know they're not busting the doors out on that place yet. But if we're going to go further, faster, we need people. We need people to be there. We need people that can do the legwork. We need people that can give. And David Downey has shown us that over the past year plus, has he not? I'm going to ask you for $25,000 in addition to his current salary to bring him on full time. That's going to be in the budget. We'll have a discussion period for that if you've got questions on that. I'm also going to ask you to add an additional $25,000 or $2,500 to our conference fees. We've got a line item in there right now that covers when we send messengers and things like that to a business meeting, whether it be state or national. We're going to add this $2,500 in there specifically for pastoral type conferences. Every conference I go to right now, I fund out of my own money. I pay the billeting, I pay the meals, I pay the travel, I pay the conference fees, I pay all of that. Some of that, with bringing Brother David on full time, we're going to have to send him to some places. There's some places Brother Phil needs to go. There's some places that even Melissa needs to go. And the last one we had her scheduled for, COVID stole that and shut it down. But listen, we need that. This series that we're going through right now on wokeness and the gospel, that came from a conference that I went to, and I got, on fire under the word, and we are now dealing with that in our church, in our community, so that it does not infect our church. And I think $2,500 is the least we can do. I think that's important. We're going to ask you for that. We're going to ask you to continue to upgrade our technology in the way that it will help us to do ministry. Not just change a chord here and there, but in a way that expands our ministry, that we can share the gospel in a better way. We're going to ask you for 5 additional monitors. We're getting rid of all of these screen types. Eventually, this will be the last one standing. This one is not that old, and it's the best one we own. All of the rest of them, they're going away. That's what we're going to ask you to approve in this budget. We're going to stick one on this back wall and that back screen that you guys see right there. If you turn around and look at it, you'll see how blurry it is. From the stage, it's even blurrier. If you're as old as I am, it's even blurrier. If you're as old as my dad, you don't even know there's one back there, right? Oh, sorry. I thought you were in the other worship center. We're going to put one right back there. We've already tested it. We can see it clearly from the stage, and it's a fourth the size of the one that's back there now. We're going to ask you for that. We're going to ask you to get rid of the one that's in our North Worship Center. We're going to replace it with 2 monitors that we can not only use for our services, we can use them for other events, for training events, for funerals, all of that. We're going to ask you for 2 in there. We're going to ask you for 2 in 2 of our classrooms. One in Brother Ricky's class, one in Brother Ken Strong's class. Those are ones that we need right now. We're doing it the hard way in those classrooms right now. We want to upgrade that technology so that we can better do ministry. I'm also going to ask you to contribute, to continue to contribute to the Galen Henry Missions Fund. Listen, last year was good, Miss Henry. It was crazy good when it comes to that fund. You gave $6,500 to that fund. This year, we're going to top it. We're going to double down, Miss Henry. I'm going to ask you in the budget, out of the general fund, because of your faithfulness over the last year, to contribute $500 a month to the Galen Henry Missions Fund. Lives can be eternally changed because of this. That's $6,000. That's what you gave last year. Now we're saying the church is going to do that. If you stop giving to it next year when I stand here and talk about this, I will recommend that we stop paying into this fund. This fund has to be from you. It has to be from your heart, that your heart is in it for missions. What our deacons have recommended here is that we want to go further, faster, that we want to do more, that we want more projects, not less. Not now the church is going to foot the bill, so I don't need to contribute to it anymore. Listen, there is no reason why next year we can't do $15,000 to $20,000 in this fund alone. And that doesn't have anything to do with our kingdom. That doesn't have anything to do with our physical plant right here. This has something to do with other places, other people, other missionaries, other ministers that need to be able to have these kind of assets and finances so that they can go further faster. And we should be a part of that. And through your giving last year, you said we can do more. We can go further and we can go faster. And we can see more lives eternally changed. If we don't hit $15,000 to $20,000 in this fund next year, I will be disappointed. It's that important. We're also going to ask you to approve the starting of Faith Bible Institute in our church. We're going to convert a room. We're going to set up tables and chairs, and we're going to put the monitor in there so that they can do the classes. Listen, this is a accredited college. When you come out the other end, it's not just with a piece of paper. When you come out the other side of this program, it takes you all the way through Scripture in, is it 4 years? In 3 years. And it's in depth. And it does not cost you as a student very much at all per semester. And then it just keeps going. If you want to know more about it, I've got every book that you're going to go through on my desk right now. You can hit me up after service, and we can show you what they're going to look at. There's only, 2 textbooks. A Wilmington's Guide, and right here. That's why it's FBI. That's why it's Faith Bible Institute that we're going to bring in. Listen, this is all about discipleship. This is all about giving our church members and family the spiritual grounding and foundation that they need to be able to stand against the wiles of the devil, right? To stand against the woke crowd, to stand against the persecution that is coming for the church. That's bold. But that's where we have to go. For discipleship, for making an eternal change. Listen, that might sound big, but listen to this in Nehemiah's charge. He knew that their task was big too. And look what he says in verse 17. He says, chapter 2, verse 17. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we're in? How Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates burned? And now he charges them, come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem that we may no longer suffer derision. He says, we can do this. We just need to do it. In verse 18, and I told them of the hand of God that had been upon me for good, and also of the words that the king had spoken to me. And they said, let us rise up and build. That's the people speaking. Listen, when we're done with our business meeting today, that ought to be our chant. Let us rise up and do this thing. That's what we ought to be able to do. So how do we do it? Look how Nehemiah did it. Look at chapter 3. Now, I'm only going to read portions of these verses, so you're going to have to pick them out, okay? The first phrase there in chapter 3 and verse 1. Then Eliashib, the high priest, rose up with his brothers and priests, and they built the sheep gate, not Nehemiah, right? It took other people. Skip down to verse 2. And next to them, the men of Jericho built. Next to them, Zaccur, the son of Imri, built. The sons of, look at verse 3, the sons of Hassenaah built the fish gate. Look at verse 4. Next to them, Meremoth, the son of Uriah, son of Hakkox, repaired. And next to them, Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, son of Meshezabel, repaired. Next to them, Zadok, the son of Baanah, repaired. Next to them, the Techonites repaired. Verse 6, Jehoiada, the son of Paseah, and Meshullam, the sons of Besodiah, repaired the gate of Hez. You see the pattern there? And it doesn't stop there. If you keep reading, you'll see. Then next to them, next to them, next to them, next to them. It took all of them, right? It's going to take the entire church being faithful to do what we're trying to do in the next year. Then it gets even more specific. Watch this. In Nehemiah chapter 3, verse 23. And after them, Benjamin and Hassab repaired opposite their house. Well, that's new. That's not in those previous ones. After them, Azariah, the son of Messiah, son of Ananiah, repaired beside his own house. Look at verse 28. Above the horse gate, the priest repaired, each one opposite his own house. Verse 29, after them, Zadok, the son of Emir, repaired opposite his own house. Each one opposite his house. You know what Nehemiah was telling these people? He was telling these people to pick up a stone. He says, pick up a stone and you build. You build in front of your house. Because if Julie builds in front of her house, and Jack builds in front of his house, and David builds in front of his house, and Glenna builds in front of her house, well then we can all accomplish the task, right? He says, pick up a stone. You think what we're laying out for the next year is difficult? It is. If you're going to depend on me and David and Melissa and Karen and who am I missing? And Phil, I'm like, if the deacons, if you're dependent on us to do it, guess what? We'll stand up here next year and we'll say, we didn't get nothing done. Because that's not going to work. Listen, I've been looking at what Phil does around here. And we've been talking about margin for a long time, right? And we've been trying to create margin in his time because he does too much. When is it that we as a church pick up a stone and we say, that's not Phil's job, that's my job. I'll own that, right? We need to pick up a stone. It's not just about budgeting, right? Now, some people say, well, Phil's full-time. He should be able to do all that stuff. Really? If Phil had margin in his time, enough margin, we'd already have a sign out there. Right? He doesn't have that kind of margin. And neither do I. We all have to pick up a stone. Is there going to be opposition? Yep. People are going to come against us. People are going to say in the budget meeting, maybe, I don't agree with that, or I don't agree with that. There's going to be people outside of our church not going to like it. that we plan to sink $15,000 to $20,000 into a missions fund. Satan ain't going to like that. And if Satan doesn't like it, guess what? He's going to tell on us. And then we're going to face opposition. Whether it's inside the church or outside the church, we're going to face opposition. You understand that, right? Be prepared for that. There's going to be opposition. Listen to this. Nehemiah faced opposition quickly. Chapter 2 and verse 10. But when Sanballat, the Horonite, and Tobiah, the Ammonite servant heard this, it displeased them greatly. Not happy, right? Skip down to verse 19. And same ones, when they heard about it, they jeered at us and despised us. Don't you know Satan's going to tell on us if we can accomplish this over the next year? He ain't happy about what we accomplished last year. He's sure not going to be happy about us setting this out. Look at chapter 4, verse 1. Now when Sanballat heard that we were building the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged, and he jeered at the Jews. And look at what he says in verse 2. He said in the presence of his brothers, in other words, he got a little coalition. You know, he calls him a split here. He says, in the presence of his brothers and of the army of Samaria, what are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore it for themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they finish up in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish and burned ones at that? Tobiah, the Ammonite, was beside him, and he said, yes, what are they building? If a fox, little tiny fox, goes up on it, he'll break down their stone wall. No doubt there was opposition, right? Look at verse 7 of chapter 4. But when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the repairing of the walls of Jerusalem was going forward and that the breaches were beginning to be closed, they were very angry. And they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem. That's the persecution that the church is bound to experience over the next 12 months. Listen, that complicated the task, did it not? Now they have armies coming against them, right? But Nehemiah had a plan. Look at verse 13 of chapter 4. So in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, in open places, I, Nehemiah, stationed the people by their clans with their swords and with their spears and with their bows. He says, I'm going to make sure they're ready to fight. And we as a church need to be ready to fight as well over the next 12 months. And I looked, verse 14, and arose and said the nobles and the officials, and to the officials and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. And then, skip down to verse 18. And each of the builders had his sword strapped to his side while he built. Listen, I know what that kind of building is like. It's a different kind of building when you're building something and you've got an M4 strapped on your back. I understand how that goes. They were ready for a fight. They could drop their trowels and their hammers and pick up their swords in a moment's notice. There's going to be opposition. But with God on our side, who can stand against us? It was a crazy year last year. I hope, I pray that this year is just as crazy. As we go forward into this next year, first, I want you to pray. That's the first thing Nehemiah did here, isn't it? He prayed over it. He says, God, is this possible? And then he was committed to the task, right? I want you to pray about it, and then I want you to be committed to the task. And then the third thing I want you to do is ask God to send you. Ask God to use you, whether it be financially, whether it be in your time, in the margin that you have, whether we create margin to make sure something happens. I want you to ask God, Lord, is it you? Are you asking me to meet that need? Whatever that need might be over the next year. And then finally, I want you to pick up a stone. I want you to build in front of your house. Listen, some of you are passionate about the flooring project that needs to take place. Then pick up that stone and you give to that. Some of you are passionate about missions and you're passionate about what we're doing with the Galen Henry Fund. Then pick up that stone and build that wall. See, not all of us can build in front of everybody's house. We'll never get the wall up in time, right? We each have to pick up a stone. Some of you are passionate about getting that bus barn built and that new bus out there. Then pick up that stone and make a difference. Ask God, where can I make a difference? Brother Phil, I'm going to ask you guys to come. I know this has been a different kind of message. And I know we've gone long, but this will make our business meeting go short, right? So we may get you out of here ahead of schedule. If every one of us picks up a stone, can you imagine what we can do? You know, the statistics show that in most churches, 20% of the people give 80% of the finances. The same goes for the people who do the work in the church. 20% of the people do 80% of the work. Can you imagine if our church, and I don't know what our percentages are, but can you imagine if our church stepped it up just 10%? Whether it was giving or service or help or just inviting people or just praying. Can you imagine if we just did 10% more than we did last year? We'd have a space problem because we wouldn't fit, right? We'd have to deal with all kinds of other problems that go with that. I think those are good problems.